As an English teacher and someone who has lived internationally for most of my adult life, I have had a lot of exposure to bilingual children and bilingual adults. And today I want to share, I don't know why I'm crying. Maybe because this is a topic that's really close and dear to my heart, since this is about my own boys. Today's video is all about bilingualism, raising bilingual children, and my thoughts on the whole process of having kids who can speak multiple languages. Today in this video, I just want to share with you a little bit about our experience as a family with having Portuguese and English and trying to teach those to our two sons while we are also living in a country with another language going on all around us outside our home. This is not by any means an expert's opinion, and that's not my intention today. Whether you have your own children or you're just planning for the future, this video is all for you, and I hope that you find it helpful. So, let's dive right in with my family's story. My husband and I met while we were overseas, and he was living in one country, I was living in another. We both had learned second languages in those countries, and we had our own backgrounds. My husband is Brazilian, so he speaks Brazilian Portuguese, and I'm American, so I speak American English. But we decided from the very get-go when we first got married that we wanted to raise our children bilingually. We had looked around us at other families, and we thought this was an amazing, amazing blessing for their children, and their children grew up with so many opportunities. We also decided that we wanted to go about this with a certain method. So our method was to do one person, one language. So for us, that meant that the language we were fluent in was the language we were going to speak with our children. So we started doing that when they were still in the womb. I started speaking to them and singing to them. My husband also spoke to them and talked to them. And then when they were born, we just continued that. We have two sons. The oldest is almost 3 and the youngest just turned 1. So they are still quite young and they don't have a lot of language yet. But we are seeing some progress in their bilingualism and a lot of different things that we have learned about being bilingual, and just the whole process of raising our children bilingually have been in these past 3 years. We didn't know a lot before we actually launched into this endeavor, but we had seen a lot of other families and we knew this was really worthwhile. Now, our observations just about bilingualism before we raised our children, and also while we have been raising them, have been that it's really easy for families who live overseas like we do in another language outside of the home to actually default to English within their home, and for their children not to really gain a lot of the other language that is one of the parents' heart languages. So for us, we watched, as me as a teacher before I got married, and then also with friends that we had, we watched as people sent their kids to international schools, and those schools were totally in English, and their children became very fluent in those languages. And so we knew that if this was the life we were going to live, we have to be really intentional about teaching our children Portuguese, because that will be the language that falls by the wayside very likely if we don't pay attention to it. So it's a very intentional thing for us, and some situations might be quite a bit easier if people are living in a country where they have both sides of the family around and they're able to interact with them. For us, it's a lot harder to find Brazilians than it is to find people who speak English from any country in the whole world. And our goal for teaching our children both languages has been for them to reconnect and connect with family and friends who live in Brazil and the United States. We don't want our children, because they're being raised overseas, to simply feel like they don't have family. We want them to feel a really strong family bond, and we know that language is a huge part of that for them. So this is something that is a non-negotiable for us. Our goal and our motivation throughout all of this is for them to build relationships with our family and to have those really deep family roots and ties. On to our experiences. These are some lessons that I learned through our experiences as a bilingual family and raising bilingual children now. The first thing that I would say that I have learned is that it's a process. It's not something that happens overnight. It's not something that's guaranteed to happen a certain way even. For our family, we're moving a lot, and so we see our sons exposed to different languages besides Portuguese and English as well, and we see that that also enters into their minds and their understanding and their mental processes. And so it's not very straightforward. This is a process, but it's not a science. And that's something that I, as a planner and as a person who really likes to follow steps, can find quite aggravating at times or frustrating at times, because I want to see a certain amount of progress with me or with my children in our language. It has taught me that I need to be patient, because language is not something that you can just hand to someone. It's not just a tool that you give to them. It's actually something that takes up part of their being. Like it involves your heart, it involves your mind, it involves your emotions, and so it's a much more delicate thing than maybe we would assume. The second thing I've learned is that it is different with each human being, and this is because we're not static beings. We have changes in our lives and we have different personalities, and so with our first and second sons, we see a difference in them between how they're learning, how they are grasping the words around them, and also which languages they're gravitating towards. And that's the third thing I've learned, is that you can actually, when you speak two languages, you can actually have a preference, or one that is more of your heart language than another. And this will change. Our sons are not by any means their full mature selves. My sons for sure will be changing from 3 years old and 1 year old until they're adults and beyond that. So right now my observations about which languages they prefer probably won't be true in 20 years, but we do see that they are grasping certain languages more. Our oldest son is grasping more of Portuguese, and our second son is grasping more of English. And that's really interesting to me, because there are a lot of factors involved in that. It's also different in the timing. So our first son was exposed to 3 languages at least from the time he was born, and he has been a little bit slower to pick up very clear words, but our second son has been surrounded mostly by one language at home, and then a little bit of the other language as people have come into our home. So for him, it's much more clear which word he wants to say, and he has chosen a lot of the time to speak English words. So that's really interesting to me. I'm really interested to see how that changes.
Apple.
Yeah, it's an apple. Good job. Apple.
Apple.
The fourth thing I've learned is that the quality of input matters, and probably any speech pathologist can tell you this, anyone who has any understanding of bilingualism. However, I didn't think a lot about this. When our firstborn was born, our lives were quite different. They've changed a lot in the past few years, and I wasn't spending as much time with him, giving him quality language input. I had a job and other things going on. So for him, I've noticed that the English has not had as great of an input as the Portuguese has, and so it makes sense to me when I look at that and think of his current ability in Portuguese and in English. And our second son, our situations have changed, and I've been a lot more with him, and so he's preferred English. The quality of the input really matters for getting your children to grasp a language. They can be exposed to it in a very cursory manner, or they can be exposed to it in a very relational and in-depth manner. Number 5, that relationship really, really matters when you're learning a language. The motivation of learning a language is really taken up a notch when you have a relationship with someone, and this is true for children too. There are studies out there that show that children who are babies who are exposed to a language just through a tape of an audio, they didn't attach the same value on the language as babies who were exposed to someone in person. They actually didn't start mimicking the sounds. Even though they were hearing them, there wasn't that relational component there. And so that kind of led these people doing the experiment to believe that there's something about language that we want someone to be physically present with us, or at least have a relationship with them. With our sons, I've noticed that too. I've found that digital things have been helpful and unhelpful for our sons. For example, my eldest son watched Leapfrog twice and then picked up the letter C. And other times there are some vocabulary words that pop up and I know he's heard them from some kind of digital or means, but not as much as maybe I would expect. It's kind of a mixed bag when it comes to digital things. Number 6, language learning has given our children a good connection with both sides of the family. When our children have gone back to visit family, they have had this just automatic comfort in talking with them because these languages are familiar to them, and there is not so much going on that they don't understand. There's some kind of connection there because, oh, my dad speaks that language, oh, you speak that language, my mom speaks that language, you speak that language, and they're not consciously thinking of those things. However, we can tell that they're comfortable with people who speak those languages, and that's really neat. Code switching. This is something that people might get frustrated with, especially teachers, when children code switch, which means that they are switching languages in the middle of a sentence or in conversation. They're using some vocabulary from one language, maybe the grammar from the other language, just changing things up a lot. But it actually shows that we are grasping a language and we're learning it. So for us, in our experience as a family, our sons code switch all the time. There's a lot of words that they don't say in one language, but they will say in another language. I can say something to my son in English and he will only say the word back in Portuguese, or my husband can say something in English and in Portuguese and my son will only say it back in English. It doesn't mean that our son isn't learning, but instead he's actually understanding and translating that word across languages. So it's actually really cool. And that's something that is really encouraging to me as a parent to remember. Number 8, there's a lot of frustration that comes with being bilingual for the child and for the parent. I know as an adult, when I try to think of a word in another language or even in my own native language and I can't remember it, I feel so much frustration because I know what I want to say, but I don't know how to say it and express it. For our son, who's a toddler, on top of all of his language confusion, there's a frustration of wanting to get his point across but not having the words yet and not being able to grasp what he's feeling. There's frustration for him when we don't understand and he's trying to explain something and he repeats it again and again and again and we just don't understand it. But there's also frustration for us as a parent because we're like, why can't I get this, and why can't he express himself, or why doesn't he try to use words? Sometimes I think that sadly I assume, well, he's not really saying something, but he actually is trying to express something. So I have had to learn to be really patient because this entire thing, again, is a process and it's not a science, and it's not something I can just do overnight. Instead, it's going to take a while. That is not necessarily true that there is a speech delay with bilingual children. There can be a silent period. I know that from being an English teacher. However, with our son, we have noticed that he has been a bit more delayed and just trying to understand everything that's going on around him. And I have brothers and sisters who I believe wouldn't mind me sharing this, but their children have been a little bit later to start talking, but when they started talking, they just went really fast and picked up a lot. So I do think that is common as well. It's not necessarily always true, but it can be common. But there's a lot of jabbering that goes on with our son right now. We can see that he's trying to speak, but he's not really knowing what words to say, and so he's mimicking sounds, and that's really good. There are a lot of helpful resources out there if you do want to evaluate your child's language ability. Your child should still have the same number of words across both languages as a child who is monolingual. So our son's age, that should be between like 300 and 450 words, and we haven't sat down to count them, but we aren't so concerned yet at this point. We are just really keeping an eye on it, and maybe soon we'll have to go to get a class or something, some kind of help. That is one fear that is really common, I know, for bilingual parents. What if my child doesn't learn language, like period? What if they just don't learn to speak, and how do you remedy that? There's a lot of confusion that can go on in a little mind, and a lot of sorting out of things, and that can take a while. So we're just trying to be patient with it, but also be aware we might need some intervention.
Okay, this is Steven. He's 2.5, and he is learning Portuguese and English at the same time, and has been since before birth, really. He's been listening to both of these languages, as well as third and fourth languages. Yeah, thank you for that kiss. Steven, can you tell them, Grandpa? No, you don't want to talk this morning? Are you being shy? Okay. You have some chocolate on your face. Bye-bye. Can you say ciao? Good. Yeah, we've got some basic words down. We're still working on some others and some pronunciation. There are quite a few differences between Portuguese and English.
Okay, Okay, reading is really crucial to language development. This I know as an English teacher, as an educator, I know that reading is really crucial to all kinds of things in our development. And so with our sons, we have made reading together in both languages really important. However, this becomes really difficult with a lack of resources. So something I have noticed is that there are a lot of resources in English, there are a lot of resources in Portuguese, but there aren't necessarily a lot of resources of both of those together. So I've actually created some for our family. I also have those on my website if you would like to use those and your family speak Portuguese and English. The link is in the description box below if you want to check those out. But I think this is true across a lot of languages, that there aren't a lot of resources tying both of those together that are quality resources. What I mean by quality is that they have a good amount of words, they're very literary, and they have good illustrations, they're appropriate for different ages. I've found that a lot of bilingual books, the very few that are available in the United States of Portuguese and English, have very few words in them, or they have very poor illustrations, or they're just not fun to read. I would like to see this remedied in future years. I do think there would be a bigger market for this because in the world as a whole, there are about as many bilingual children as monolingual children. That's a big market. So if you want to launch into just making resources and writing books, go for it. Please help all of us out. Last thing I want to say today, at least, in the future, I'll probably have more things to say based on our journey in bilingualism as a family. But the last thing I want to say today is that I have learned that for me to learn the other language spoken in our family is really helpful. My husband speaks English already. That's really helpful for him because he understands everything that goes on in our home. For me, I have been gradually learning Portuguese and thankfully have been learning it along with my son. So basically everything he understands, I understand too, and I understand a bit more than he does probably. I have had to commit myself to that. I've had to make that really important to me. I think that this has several benefits for us as a family. First of all, my children see that language learning is valuable because I'm also investing myself in it. Second, they see that we're all able to relate to the same people, and so all of our relationships can be held in common, which is really, really, really nice. And then third, it helps me to understand and to know what's going on between my husband and my kids. If there is some kind of discipline issue or something like that, I can feel really comfortable because I know what's going on and I know, like, oh, your dad just told you cannot do that, so you can't ask me if you can do that. You know, just making sure that we're on the same page as a family. So that has been a really good thing for me. I really hope that this video and these thoughts, as rambling as they are helpful to you as you look into raising your kids bilingually, or as you are raising them bilingually. Know that you are not alone. There are a lot of us in the world, and it's really great to meet other people. So please do introduce yourself in the comments below. I'd love to meet you that way. I really wish I could sit down with everyone in person and just meet everyone and hear your stories and your experiences, but this is, I guess, the next best thing. In the future, I do plan on making more videos about the pros and cons of raising bilingual children and being a bilingual family, and also of being in a third country, a third language, as a dual lingual family. So for sure, stay tuned for those. Hit the subscribe button and the bell notification if you'd like to see those in the future so that you don't miss them. And I really hope that you have a great day, an awesome day. As always, it's good to see you and chat with you. Love you. See you next time. Ciao.